Hello, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join me here today. I'm going to be talking about strategies for containing cloud computing costs in healthcare and life sciences. By way of introduction, my name is Floden. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Seqera Labs. Start with some background on Seqera. So we've been around about 10 years now, founded by myself and Paulo Di Tommaso, really spinning out of the Nextflow project itself. So Nextflow is now a very widely used tool, which is developed for the analysis of genomic information, but also really anywhere across life sciences and beyond. There's about 16,000 people who use the tool now. And I'll kind of go a little bit into how the tool works and how it can really help you in terms of reducing your cloud spend. The products itself that we have is Nextflow as well as Tower, which is really a full stack application for the management of those pipelines. We also offer a whole bunch of services and support around the Nextflow ecosystem. We have customers, I see some of them here, mostly in the biopharma space, but also in things like clinical diagnostics, etc. So it's a kind of anywhere where you're touching sequencing information or imaging data. Also some ML stuff is really where the sort of sweet spot for us is. Just a little bit of background on some of the applications there. So Nextflow and some of the technology here was really widely used during the SARS-CoV-2 sequence pandemic. So for example, the sequence analysis here, they developed pipelines which are developed in Nextflow would be able to send out to the points of sequencing, and really from there, you're able to do the analysis there and send that information back. Really the idea of being able to create really complex analysis pipelines and then kind of run them in the point of sequencing in any infrastructure. We have other customers like 23andMe here, and this is an example of them running in AWS batch in this case. And you can see this blue line is just the number of CPUs in a single batch environment. So they're running up to 10,000 CPUs here. It shows the scale of what's possible with Nextflow. It's a sort of fantastic article there describing some of the benefits of using Nextflow that 23andMe see. We also have folks in the personalized medicine space. So this is an example here of a biotech platform, which is being developed by Genentech and Roche. Here's an example where we have an example of melanoma, so in phase 2 trials. So you take a sample of tumor, normal tissue, identify new antigens on the outside of those cells, and then develop personalized mRNA vaccines for that. And as I mentioned before, clinical diagnostics is another big one as well. So either this is being done for clinical setting or also in population genomics projects where there's, again, a lot of sequencing is the really kind of common piece there, and trying to understand, like, as the amount of sequencing data just only increases, how folks can really do this in the cloud effectively in an efficient manner. And that's that we sort of work with users and customers on to be able to do that. A little bit of background on why this is important here. Well, if you think about some of the main costs with regards to computing in the cloud, it's typically running these large analysis pipelines. Each one of those pipelines is made up of many different steps, many different tools. What Nextflow allows folks to do is to write those pipelines and then to run them in any infrastructure in an efficient way. Here's an example of it. This is an ancient DNA analysis, but you can see you're doing typical things of QC steps, of doing BWA aligning those reads, and then sort of extracting information from that as well. And the ability to be able to write this and then run this efficiently is kind of essential to some of the things we're going to speak about later with strategies on that. Nextflow itself the syntax is designed to be used by scientists, so you can really take existing tools, essentially link them together in an efficient way. And here on the left-hand side, you can see a task, which is essentially becomes part of a workflow. And it's the idea is it's supposed to be very readable as well. So it means you can manage the pipelines in a much more efficient way than using things like bash scripts and linking things together yourself. In Nextflow, you take any code that you have. So if you already have got pipelines that are written in R or Python, you can simply take those pieces of those components, you can link them together with this very scalable data flow programming model. You define the dependencies, and really from there, you wrap all of that into a Git repository. And again, this is really about bringing modern software engineering practices to scientists. Once a pipeline is being written, then it can be then run in any of the infrastructure. For example, within AWS, you can run Nextflow at least 5 different ways. And this kind of flexibility is really essential to be able to move the workload, move the pipeline, the analysis in this case, to where the data is. And that flexibility is something which is very much appreciated as well by customers. If we look at the growth of Nextflow, the open source product, it's been really, continues to grow to this day. And we see like a big uptick, so particularly over the last couple of years, both in terms of downloads and in terms of engagement. And a lot of that engagement and a lot of those, I guess, drivers to the project has been around this collection of pipelines, of community pipelines, which have been developed and which are kind of bringing folks into the ecosystem. So here is this is what we call NF Core, which is, again, a collection of pipelines, but also tools and some standards around how Nextflow pipelines can be developed. And some of these have got sort of many contributors to them, so in the order of 50 or 60 different contributors, domain experts in a particular analysis who basically have those pipelines. And people are free to come in and use those and sort of take them off the shelf and get going with Nextflow really, really quickly. Another key part of this is thinking about, so how can we solve this, not for the individual bioinformatician, who is typically maybe launching things from their laptop, but how can we think about that in a wider context where these pipelines start to be used by folks either in the lab or as fully part of automated systems? How can we do this in a way that you can make those analysis effectively done and also in a cost-efficient way? We like to think about this like the data analysis lifecycle. So this is typically the development of tooling, development of workflows, connecting in with your data, so data management to a certain extent. The pipelines themselves is obviously a big part of what Nextflow does. And as we're building up capabilities here into things like interactive notebooks, so things like Jupyter, analytics, and the kind of standard features you expect from enterprise software with regards to collaboration and being able to work efficiently and call things as a service from API as well. Really kind of key reasons, and one of the key reasons that folks move to Tower is just this pure reduction in cloud costs. We also have a whole bunch of stuff around how you can do this in an efficient manner with regards to reproducibility, so you can pull things from Git repositories. Things can be very defined, and this way it helps a lot with traceability. And the way that it works is essentially connecting in with your own resources that you have there. So again, this idea that you move the workload to where the data is. And I'll kind of show you some examples of, and that's kind of one of the key concepts that we have with regards to how you can save costs in here. Here's some really kind of nice case studies that we've seen from our customers. So one of them here is Seqera, and really we see here that working with them, they've instantly been able to be much more productive in terms of the time spent. Typically, we're seeing bioinformaticians who can then spend much more time thinking about the science than necessarily having to think about the infrastructure and the like. So it just provides like a single pane of glass onto those computing resources. And here's an example from Arcus. So when they went to it, basically with sort of minimal tuning here, we say that they were able to decrease the cost per run for 40 to 50%. And they were already running relatively efficiently here. So some sort of immediate savings to be had there. And I'll kind of go through now some of the reasons and then some of those ways that came about. The first thing about it, as I mentioned, is you run in your own environment. So if you're running with Seqera, when you're doing that, you're essentially connecting in with your cloud, and that could be AWS, and could be batch environments, could be Google Cloud Batch, could be Microsoft Azure. All of those have the connections in with being able to run up and scale up. So the infrastructure is essentially scales down to zero when you're not running. And as data comes off a sequencer, or as you wanted to launch an analysis, essentially those resources spin up. And by doing it in this way, it's much more cost effective because you can pay, for example, spot instances, typically 20% of the price, and you're already then being able to get kind of very good rates, because essentially you're just paying for the direct compute. There's no third party in between you and the cloud provider in this case. So you get the best rate possible. Another thing is being able to really move the analysis to the data. In genomics, the data is typically very large. If it's sitting in object storage, for example, AWS S3, the ability then to be able to essentially launch that pipeline. And when you launch the pipeline, it's essentially the pipeline is being sent to the cloud provider where the data is. The compute is spun up for you, and the analysis takes place there. So this ability to then quickly shift from one environment to another, maybe you've got a test environment or a dev, or you've got your object storage is in different regions where you have to access. And so this provides that kind of flexibility in this way. You don't have to move the data around, and you can run, again, very efficiently across those different environments. Another one is around kind of more a technical thing with regards to resuming. The pipelines can last from hours to days in terms of the execution time. And very often for things, maybe network connectivity or whatever issues you may have, the pipeline would then stop. What we're able to do with Nextflow is it's got a very smart caching mechanism. So it essentially knows exactly where the point of failure was. And when you do a resumption on that, you don't have to repeat those previous tasks that have already succeeded. Essentially start from the point of failure. And this has huge savings, both in terms of time and also in terms of cost. We've also been and spent a fair bit of time now in terms of optimizing the workloads themselves. So you can think about every task essentially running in a container that requests some amount of resource, memory, CPU, for example. And what we've done is built a very interesting machine learning model behind on the back end, which can analyze all of the task information and then predict for you exactly how much CPU or how much memory it should result in. This is an example of one of the NF Core biorecon pipelines that we ran sort of without any optimization. You can see here the wall time was about nearly sort of 5 hours, 4 hours 52. And the cost was just under $10 when we ran through that pipeline. You can see here that when we run it in an optimized fashion, which is essentially one click within inside of Tower, you end up with a really significant decrease in the amount of time. And also the cost here is essentially goes from $9 to $1.50. The reason for that is that you're able to essentially request the right amount of resources per task in a dynamic way. And that means you get more tasks on the same amount of virtual machines in this case here. And that kind of optimization of that and getting the right type of virtual machine and the right tasks onto those has significant savings as well. We've also built some technology around how the actual storage works at the compute layer. And what I mean by this is the storage connected to the compute. Often we see folks, for example, in AWS running things like EBS, which is essentially a disk which is associated with the virtual machine there. What we see, though, is that all of the pipelines, they have a large amount of intermediate files that have to go into the virtual machine, run the task, and then get spit out at the end. What we've done with Fusion is essentially a driver which sits inside of the container where the task runs, and this enables it to instantly mount onto the S3, which avoids the need to have this waiting period of uploading and downloading from that. It happens automatically in the background with regards to S3. This results in, again, significant cost savings across that, and basically means the VMs are not sitting there idle, and you get much more efficient data transfer of that. When it comes to cost, another key thing is just to be able to have visibility on that, to be able to budget and to be able to assign costs to particular projects or particular executions, particular pipelines, etc. We integrate in the cost labeling or cost tagging, as it's sometimes called, across the different cloud providers. So here's an example where you can add labels to a compute environment, for example, and then you can see that transparently coming through in this example, AWS Cost Explorer. That allows you to then instantly know exactly which piece, which pipeline is running, or which compute environment is using resources. And you can obviously create things like alerts, and keeping up to date with that information is kind of very critical as you scale into the cloud. Finally, a really interesting one here is just on being able to get the reports and get the output of the pipelines. It's great to be able to run this analysis, but if the pipeline is not producing the correct output for you, or there may be some errors in that, you want to be able to track that very quickly. And we have a tool called MultiQC, which is very widely used, which really enables that kind of reporting system for being able to get the outputs of a pipeline, quality control on a pipeline, and just keeping those aggregate statistics available to you sort of reduces a lot of potential spend issues. We're also really big into automation, and the idea here is that kind of removing humans from inside the loop there, or the ability to have errors. This is an example of what you can do with Tower, where the sample sheet would, for example, drop into an S3 bucket. From there, that would trigger an execution. Essentially, a data set would be uploaded to Tower, and that would fire off the execution into the computer environment of your choice, in this case, AWS Batch. That kind of full automation of the system, the fact that Tower is able to integrate with really any system through a very powerful API helps a lot with regards to reducing time, but also reducing costs in terms of making things run in an automated way very efficiently as well. So just kind of summarizing that, if we think about some of the savings that can come about, obviously spot instances or preemptible instances is a really, really good place to start. Nextflow makes it very easy. You run on your own cloud environment to do that. There's the automated resource optimization, which I mentioned. This is getting the right task on the right VM with the right size. The pipeline ability to resume functionality. Again, this can be really a big one depending on how often you have to restart the pipelines. And providing that kind of visibility is usually really important as well. Other things on Fusion and kind of just some basic training that you can have your teams undergo to understand exactly how the cloud costs work and to be really kind of create some accountability with regards to that. So I'll end it with there. Thank you so much for the time. I just point out, if you are interested in joining the Nextflow Summit, we'll be holding this in Barcelona, as also one in Boston later in the year. So do feel free to sign up for that. That's at summit.nextflow.io. Thank you so much for the time, and please reach out to us as well if you want to see a demo of any of these things or would like to see how this could be applied to your own cloud environments. Thanks so much.